All right, guys, welcome to monthly support call. I think this is number 6, Arian. June, end of June. We got July coming up tomorrow. It's quite a beautiful day to be outside. I think Arian and I are both kind of outdoors right now. It's a good break from the heat wave that we've been getting. So let's kick this. Let's jump into our conversation here. Wait for some folks to come on in, but we got some really good topics. Coach Arian and I have been chatting a little bit about some of the conversations that we've been having with some of you guys around nutrition. As you guys know, we have a very lifestyle-based fitness approach to looking, feeling, functioning at our best. And we know that nutrition is one of the main pillars, aside from movement. Stress management, connection is kind of one. And then we've got sleep, making sure that we're covering. But nutrition is such a big piece. I mean, we can make so many strides just moving our body consistently and doing the things that are going to be necessary for us to move the needle forward, but also changing what we're putting into our bodies and making sure that we're really mindful of the food and the fuel that we're putting into our gas tank. So I think we're going to take this down a very basic overview. I mean, we've got our summer recalibrate challenge coming on up, so no better time than now to talk a little bit about nutrition. We even maybe share some details into what we're planning on doing here in the next couple of weeks. But Arian, let's talk a little bit about this topic of intuitive eating. And I think this is an approach that more people take than not, where I guess I'll give a brief description of intuitive eating. Intuitive eating means you're just going off of your intuition. You're eating when you feel like you're hungry, and you're stopping when you're not. Ultimately that would be the goal. You are being you're not necessarily tracking macronutrients, tracking calories. You're just kind of eating by feel, I guess we would say. And Arian, you can detail a little bit more around your definition of intuitive eating, but I think this is a really challenging thing to do. In my personal opinion, intuitive eating needs to be earned with a basic understanding of, calories in versus calories out, macronutrients, just a basic understanding of food in general. But let's talk about this topic of intuitive eating. And what are your thoughts around that? You can give a clearer description if you'd like, but let's chat about that.
Yeah, no, great overview. I would say intuitive eating is basically just eating without following any particular dietary design. I think that, when you look at it, there's so many different types of diet plans that have been created or, kind of popularized in the recent, with intermittent fasting, with, 1 meal a day. So just time restricting, so limiting the amount of time you can eat, but really not putting any mind into kind of the amount or the makeup. You can do keto, where you're putting more of an emphasis on like the makeup of what you're eating, but less of an emphasis on the types of, the amounts of food. You also see things like paleo or just general meal plans or macros. And I think the big problem with all of these the big problem with intuitive eating is that a lot of times you're steering away from kind of anything that's specific. So everything comes back down to a goal. Again, I'm going kind of a long way around with it, but whenever I think of like people who have the ability to intuitively eat, it's people who have like a really good handle on top of what the amount of food they need to hit their specific goals are, and they are at their goals. So now it's essentially, we almost refer to as cruise control, right? And if you think about somebody, in any capacity, like if you haven't learned how to drive yet, you probably shouldn't learn how to use cruise control. But that kind of car analogy, right, especially as you're starting off, fits extraordinarily well when you think about like novice nutritional approaches, right? If I was asked somebody, hey, what's your goal? And they say weight loss. And if I say, okay, well then like on average, like how many calories a day do you eat? And if they have no idea what that number is, it's a pretty good indication that you don't really understand how to make any measurable, adjustments, whether that's up or down. Are you eating enough protein? Are you eating enough carbs? Like, where is the bulk of your calories coming from? A lot of that just becomes guessing. What we found, and if you look at kind of why people have had success, it's typically moving away from a standard American diet. I think that everybody here, especially if you're at Behemoth, that anybody can look at and see that following a standard American diet, probably what the FDA recommends and a lot of those things, is probably going to push you into I would say like disease or away from optimal health. And so moving away from that tends to yield progress, but is it necessarily, you know, keto, right? I know a lot of people who have come, specifically when they first start, ask about keto, right? Is it simply that you don't do well with carbs, or is it that you've eaten fewer calories by removing processed food and have found yourself eating more protein and like good vegetables? Hold on a second. Yes, sir. Hey, can you go sit down, please? Hey, can you go sit doing my best here. Same thing with intermittent fasting, right? When we look at most of these breakdowns, it typically revolves around some type of caloric restriction. Now, I'm also leveraging this from the standpoint of like most people coming in, I would say the vast majority of people are probably more on the weight loss side as opposed to the weight gain. But at the end of the day, the big focal point is typically like, what is the makeup? How is that broken down? And then like, what are you doing to measure progress? And so when I look at like myself or like our coaching staff or Asia or other people who it's like, I understand how and what, you know, like enough calories looks like on a daily basis, this becomes a lot easier for me to eat intuitively. Asia, I'm gonna have to pass back to you for a minute. Right?
I'll step in here. Kudos to Arian playing father for the day. But Ari brought up a lot of really good things around intuitive eating. And so, you know, intuitive eating is what we would consider more of an advanced way of you know, supplying yourself with energy and nutrients. And Arian brought up a really good point of like cruise control, right? This is something that's earned when we have a base level understanding of calories within foods. We're understanding of macronutrients, proteins, fats, carbohydrates. We understand quality food versus quantity of food. And I think the next kind of STEM question would be, okay, well, how do we get to cruise control, right? Because cruise control is at that point where it's like, let's make that analogous with training at Behemoth, right? You know, for some of our members that have been with us for years, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and so on, this just becomes part of their everyday habits, right? Where they go and travel on vacation. It's not that they just completely take off moving their body. It just becomes part of their routine. So when they're on vacation, they're on a cruise, or they're traveling, they're working out, they're training their body, because that's essentially what has just been ingrained in their everyday actions, their habits. And so intuitive eating would be very similar to, would be analogous to that, where it's like we've built up this understanding and this time under tension of understanding which foods work best for our body, which meal plan or meal approach works best for our body. And we understand that like one decision, whether it's effective or ineffective, isn't going to dictate whether we fall off the wagon or stay on the wagon. But, you know, the majority of the time, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, we're eating foods that are real, whole food sources that are effective in helping us look, feel, function at our best. And now we're in this just kind of cruise control. This is just how we eat. This is just how we supply food to our body. And so I guess the question that we want to move into a little bit more, and that I'll direct your way, is like, okay, if cruise control is the advanced, if that is something, it's not cruise control, I'm sorry, if intuitive eating is something that needs to be earned, like, well, where should somebody start in order to start moving that direction? What should we be focusing on?
That's a great question. I think, and I apologize for juggling. I'm doing the best I can here, but I think it always comes back down to like the amount of effort that you're willing to put in or that you're able to put in. And I think why intuitive or cruise control type eating is so alluring is because I don't focus on anything, or I can eat kind of what I want for as long as I'm not doing this, right? But it's very specific rules, and I think that's where most people kind of unnecessarily are working harder than they need to, right? If it's not the carbs that are killing you, then why would I need to follow a meal plan that is like, you know, 95% fat, 5% protein, and 0% carbs, right? When you look at kind of, you know, the implementation of keto or intermittent fasting, and a lot of the things that kind of come from some of these other dietary approaches, it always comes back down to the same thing that I see people fail time and time again on, or struggle with, is this is too much rigor, or this is not simple enough. I have 90 other things that I'm juggling. I don't want to have to focus on this. And so it feels like when I'm looking at, hey, tracking your food, or, you know, keeping up with stuff, the simpler, or the approach that allows you to make progress, right, is going to be ultimately the one that you have to put a little bit more attention on, until you fully understand. So when I think about this, one of the big pieces of like what makes people effective over the long part is always going to be like, what are you able to do beyond this first month? So if I think about it, right, a lot of people look at lifestyle as like, hey, if I could focus for 4 weeks or for 6 weeks or for 9 weeks or whatever, a short amount of period, then once I get to my goal, I don't have to do that anymore. And I can ultimately have the body that I want and not have to think about it. But in reality, it's like, okay, well, if I do something for a short amount of time, if I sprint towards a specific goal, I see a lot of improvement. And then I immediately reverse trail and do exactly the opposite of what I was doing. And I put all that weight back on over the next 3, 5, 6, 9 months. Like, how effective is that approach really? And that's what I think most people kind of get lost in the shuffle is that you're doing something. Again, I've heard juice cleanses or fasts or keto or whole 30, you name it, right? But it's that, hey, I'm not eating the way I should be. I'm eating intuitively, whether you want to say it or not. But it's I'm not following anything. I'm not tracking anything. I'm hoping that I can train hard enough to offset all of the calories that I'm bringing in. But in reality, it always comes back down to goals. And when I think about like what people are trying to accomplish that I run across most, at least at this point, is always body composition. And the biggest driving factor of success there is what you're putting in your body. And if what gets you to what your goal is in the next 6 weeks is, you know, a ridiculous deficit diet that isn't sustainable, that isn't long term, and it isn't something that you're going to hold on to for the long term, then why would we do that if after 6 weeks you're going to go, right back in the other direction? And so those are the things that, like, when I think about, and when we kind of come back to like what our ultimate approach is always like, what is the most effective for you for the long term? What is the most optimal solution? And I always go back to like, if quantity is the direct relationship with your weight, right? The amount of food that you eat on a regular basis, the quality has the effect of your health. With most people starting off, like the biggest driving factor, if what's going to keep me on a long-term approach is weight loss, then like, although quality of food is important, the quantity of that food is essentially going to make it or break it. Like, you can overeat grass-fed and organic and raw and pastured. You could overeat those. It's harder. It's much harder to do, but at the same time, like, that becomes kind of the same thing. And I think when we look at, the people who maybe are just tracking in the wrong direction, I think it's that feeling of, well, I'm putting effort in, or I'm going to the gym and I'm expecting this big return on my energy invested. When in reality, it's like you're moving, like exercise, when we think about like in terms of the total amount of calories burned on a daily basis, is like 10%, right? Even if you're like you're talking about like an aggressive amount of exercise, it's like 10% of your daily calorie burn. So whether or not you're really doing that, I mean, there are some absolute massive benefits in exercise that you can't get in any other capacity. But when you look at the total amount of calories burned, or the total amount of like effectiveness on fat loss, right? You can get much more bang for your buck looking at a nutritional approach in any capacity. And the thing that's going to make it really stick is something that you can hold for 6 months as opposed to 6 weeks. And so, kind of getting back into your question, like why is so remind me, it was
Yeah, it would just takeaways on if intuitive eating is an advanced principle that somebody would want to work their way towards, like, where do we begin? Where do we start if somebody feels like they're doing intuitive eating, or feels like intuitive eating is something that they want to accomplish, or maybe they're doing it currently, but it's not allowing them to look, feel, and function at their best? Like, where do they need to begin in order to work towards that?
Yeah, so I think that's such a great question. And so, like, when you look at kind of starting points, like the ultimate staple point, most times it comes back into what is your ultimate progress with current intervention. So why are you trying to lose weight? Okay, the amount of food that I'm eating is causing me to stay the same, gain, or lose, right? It kind of has to be one of those three components. And so if I'm making an intervention, if I'm taking steps forward and I'm not seeing any progress, then I'm going to need to make additional things. I might not, I might be using my palms to measure. That might not be as effective because the choices of food that I'm eating, even though I'm eating a palm-sized, portions. If I'm eating ribeyes and fattier cuts of pork and things that have a lot more calories in them, like it stands the reason that at the end of or using that kind of methodology, I might need to be a little bit more precise on what I'm actually trying to do. And so where I like to start with people is simple, right? Write down like the foods that you're eating and write down what type of food they are, right? And if you look at those and then you look them up, see what the vast majority of calories are actually derived from. My favorite example here is eggs, right? We love eggs. I think eggs are the staple of everybody's healthy diet, especially if you can tolerate them well. But when most people think about bringing in eggs in your diet, you're like, oh, that's a high protein meal. Okay. Well, Asia, how many calories are in an egg on average? Do you know?
60, 90?
Yeah, around 70. So depending on the size of an egg, it's about 70 calories. Do you know how many grams of protein are in an egg?
9?
6.
So
6 on average. And so 6 grams of protein, 4 calories per gram of protein. That means that 24 of those 70 calories are actually protein. So if I had a protein goal of, let's say, nice round number, 30 grams of protein, right, for the morning, I would have to eat 5 eggs in order to hit that protein goal, to get my 30 grams of protein. Well, because I'm eating 5 eggs, it's also 350 calories, right, of additional stuff that's coming in. But if I'm pairing that with oil that I'm cooking on the pan, all the other components, like that becomes a big deal. Now, using that example for somebody who has like actually real world example that's come up, like if I'm talking to a gentleman who's looking at trying to eat 180 grams of protein on a day, and in his breakfast window, he wants to eat 60 grams of protein to hit 30% per meal, like that's almost 10 eggs. Like that's just not feasible. And when you think about it from a calorie standpoint, like you're shooting yourself in the foot, because in reality, you're not really eating high protein. It's really like higher fat. So same thing with steak, same thing with a lot of the other options that you tend to reach for. You might not really have as good an idea of what the actual makeup is, because when I look at like a vegan style approach, beans and lentils and things like that tend to be like the first line of defense for them to make sure that they're getting their protein in. But if I look at how many grams of protein are in a serving of beans versus how many carbs, it's like your body doesn't know any different. Like you're eating a substantial amount of carbs. And so to make sure that I'm hitting, if I'm using a protein target of 100 grams of protein, in order to get my 100 grams of protein from something that looks like beans, I'm vastly over consuming everything else. And that just kind of falls into the same bucket. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think the takeaway from that is getting a good grasp on numbers per the individual, right? Because if there is zero understanding of how many calories are in an egg or foods that we're eating, or what the macronutrient breakdown is, or even something along the lines of like, hey, I want to get here, or I want to lose this, or I want to gain this, but I don't actually know how many calories it's going to take me to get there, or how many calories I'm expending on a daily basis, then this falls back into that intuitive camp. And if the intuitive camp is something that's too advanced for where the current individual is at, then we've got to go back to the drawing board, and we've got to get some grasp some concrete numbers with things. And so kind of like Arian's talking about, and Arian, we can share some of our favorite, maybe like ways of finding those numbers. And I think, just to echo what Arian's saying, I think we all have to start somewhere where there are more numerical values tied into where I'm currently at and where I want to go. Like, how many calories do I need to consume on a daily basis, literally just to lay in bed and like not do anything? We call that a resting metabolic rate. There's a lot of applications out there that are going to give you probably more of an accurate goal, or an accurate number than a non-accurate number, right? We're big on utilizing like the Whoop technology. Like the Whoop technology more likely is going to give you more of an accurate number on where your caloric expenditure is versus not. Something like a MyFitnessPal is going to be closer than not. And if you're someone who's like, I need the most perfect number possible, I mean, you can go along the lines of getting like a medical grade RMR, which basically hooks you up to like a oxygen masks and measures how much CO2 you expend. But I don't think we need to go those lengths. I just think we need to have some sort of generic number that's closer than further away. And then we need to know, well, what is the calorie goal that I need to hit to gain or to lose or to maintain? And then there has to be a practice around, okay, like Arian said, let me take down all the foods that I'm bringing in to my body on a daily basis, because at the end of the day, like I think the statistic is like 70% of people out there grossly underestimate how many calories they're taking in on a daily basis. And that same number of people, if not probably a little less or a little more, grossly overestimate the amount of energy they're expending through exercise and training. So what that shows us is we're not very intuitive beings at all. So we need to grasp onto some more concrete data, some more concrete numbers, and utilizing some of these applications. MyFitnessPal is a great app that's been, tried and true for the longest time, but you can get into there, create a free account, get a general guideline of how many calories you need to do X, Y, and Z goals. And then you could start tracking the foods that you're pulling into your body and seeing, well, where am I? Because if it projects you a number based on wanting to lose, but then at the end of the day, you're just taking in your daily's consumption of calories and you're 500, 600, 700 calories above where you need to be, now we start getting a good grasp on, like, no wonder the scale is not moving in the right direction, or no wonder the body composition is not moving in the right direction. So this isn't a forever thing, right? These are just tools. The same way that we use tools like meal plans on these challenges, or meal plans to help guide people and give them a blueprint. These are just tools that help us gain more information of what's going on and how to take this vehicle wherever we need to go. And ultimately, the goal is cruise control. The goal is intuitive eating. The goal is not to have to be on a detox plan or be on using MyFitnessPal forever, but it's a tool that's used to help gain information to say, hey, how are the foods that I'm putting into my body helping me or hurting me? And where do I need to be with where I'm basically at? And Aaron, you could share some of the other applications that you might think are helpful for folks, but I like to come back to something like a MyFitnessPal because it gives you a good guideline of kind of where your calories need to be, but it also gives you a really good database of foods. I mean, I can't think of a food that's not on there that most people are eating, whether it's real whole food or it's a packaged food, but it gives you a good general gauge of like what I'm taking in, what's the calorie value, what's the protein value at the end of the day, carb value, fat value. And I mean, you could share some of your favorite apps or the things that you like to use as well.
Yeah, so I actually don't love MyFitnessPal because you have the individualization. Like, you can get on there and you could add chicken and you could put whatever stats you want in there, and then it's shared for everybody. Like, you can have some inaccuracies. I mean, there are obviously like check mark foods and non-check mark foods. But like, you'll see like Grandma Joe's stew, and then it's like somebody else put in some details. So my preferred fitness track, or not fitness tracker, but calorie tracker, is called Chronometer. And we can drop that into the recap, but it's CRONOMETER. But it is better because it uses the NIH and I think the FDA like actual measurements for most of the foods. And so, yeah, packaged foods are all in there, everything's on there. But typically, when you're using for ingredients or everything else, like, it's a little bit more verified. It's being pulled from a database that's a little bit more appropriate, or I guess a little bit more verified. So it just has a little bit more, like, I would say, like sniff test pass approved as we go for it. Now with that, I would also say that, like, yeah, Asia's right. Like, depending on, so right now currently I can think of 7 different methods, 7 different formulas. Some of them are the same formula to calculate the same daily expenditure, and all of them have probably, a 300 to 500 calorie swing, and that's up and down. So like, I can use, like one off of an Omni calculator or something else, and it would say 300 fewer calories than if I did something else that would say 300 higher. So it'd be 600 calories off. Like, that's a substantial difference. And so I think it always comes back down to, like, how well are you tracking what you actually want to see improvement of? Because that's the real deal, right? When we think about, Megan just got on, thank goodness. When I think of kind of what's the biggest impact, it's like even if I was to take you, Asia, for instance, like, how much effort do you have to put in to maintain your current body weight, your current performance, and everything into it? Like, you put a significant amount of effort into building the relationship with farmers and knowing kind of what goes into it. But at this point, all you have to do is, like, it's a garden. You just tend to it, right? You take some weeds out here and there, but for the most part, I know a portion. I know exactly how much it is. But for you, you can maintain your body weight. You can probably gain or lose simply by directionally improving or directionally increasing or decreasing the amount of food you're consuming. And you know exactly how that's supposed to feel. That took years of being a professional athlete, years of tracking, and years of measuring, years of everything else. And I would say I'm in the same category. Right now, I am a huge proponent of going back and forth every once in a while and cleaning it up by making sure, like that's when hey, go back to measuring a week just to see what a portion is, just to make sure that you're kind of calibrated. But when most people are starting off, it's, hey, I'm going to make a significant amount of effort. How much progress are you seeing? Like, what are you truly trying to accomplish? Like, what does success look like for you? And if that's, hey, I would love to get back into a different shirt size. Okay, well, how are you tracking that? Are you doing tape measures? Are you doing photos? Like, are you trying to put that shirt back on at the end of every week? Like, how consistent are you with your approach and following along with it? And those are the things that, like, it sounds really simple, but like consistency is a superpower. And the reason that most people fail is because Monday through Friday, I'm on top of the ball. That feels like it's 70% of the week. I'm doing everything that I should. I'm eating how I should. I'm skipping breakfast because that I heard is better and it's, blood sugar regulation. But on the weekends, if you're not looking, right, it's not hard to overconsume enough calories to literally put you into a surplus for the entire week. And all of a sudden, day to day doesn't matter anymore. It's week to week. And so what I really think is holding people back, it's what are you using to track progress and how are you adjusting that on a day-to-day basis? Most people are taking too much of an aggressive approach. I've heard a lot recently about kind of like two sides of a spectrum, right? Because most people look at this as black and white. You're on the ball or you're off the ball, right? You're on the wagon, you're off the wagon, right? It's that drill sergeant perfectionism. And if I can't do it perfect, then I'm not going to do it. I missed Monday's, 5 a.m. session. Well, if I can't do Monday, well, I missed the whole week. I'm not going to go Wednesday or Friday and I'm going to eat like an a-hole. And all of a sudden I'm 2 weeks behind. And then that turns into another week. And then, we all are busy. There is infinite amount of work, whether it's family or kids or business or everything else. It's the people who can make this as effective as hygiene, right? I've been using this analogy too. It's like, Asia, would you ever go to sleep without brushing your teeth? No. Would you ever wake up without brushing your teeth?
Oh.
Right. And in that same regard, like, would you ever not train, right, during the week? Would you not train at least 3 times a week? It's the same kind of mentality. Like, there are lots of days I'm sure you don't feel like it, you don't have time, or maybe it's not as effective as you would hope it would, but it's still better than nothing. And I think that mentality makes you successful, right? It's no matter what. I mean, how many years would you say you've been consistent with at least 3 days a week fitness?
Yeah, I mean, over the past decade.
Yeah, I mean, same capacity, right? And so when you start like zooming out, was it this week eating exactly how you wanted to that made or break, your progress towards what you're actually trying to accomplish? Or is it the fact that you have a massive foundation to build upon? And so if you go and take a trip here or anything else, and I think that's what most people kind of are missing, is I am not paying attention truly to what I'm doing. My goal is this. Okay, well, what steps are you taking? And I think that's where, again, a lot of this falls into that confusing. If I don't have the right approach, if I don't have the perfect calorie count, if I don't know the exact protein makeup, then I'm not going to do it because it's not effective. It's like, that's not true. Like, if we go to the extreme and I said, hey, you had to eat, this is actually a proven, like, there's a study on this, 2,000 calories of only Twinkies. Can you hear me okay still? Okay. 2,000 calories of only a Twinkie, right? There is a scientist that literally did a study. He ate 2,000. He measured it out. He ate 2,000 calories of only Twinkies. And I think 100 calories came from an Ensure. And he lost like 20 pounds over the course of a month. And the answer is not, okay, well, Twinkies are clearly healthy. It's, well, what was this guy eating beforehand, right? For him to now measure squarely on the amount of energy that he's bringing in, right? For him to see progress. Now, I think you and I can both argue that, or agree that there is no redeeming health benefit of Twinkies. But at the same time, if I was to true out for something like calories, like, I am absolutely going to see progress. And those are the things where, like, whether it's condiments or creamers in coffee or beverages or snacks or bites or foods that my kids didn't eat that I'm picking up and I'm not thinking about, like it adds up more than you think. And especially if your goal is weight loss, like if we're not really understanding like truly what it means to like be on top of something, I think it's very, very difficult for us to see any meaningful progress over the long term, especially let's say you do get to your goal. That's where it gets more frustrating. At the end of the day, like the goal is not to eat as few calories as possible. It's to eat as many calories as necessary to sustain and hold a certain weight, right? Asia, if you had to, eat 2,000 additional calories today, like I guarantee you wouldn't even notice the difference, right? Like because of activity, because of energy, because of everything, your body is very much dialed in where it doesn't need that. I have had so much consistency built in that I'm at the point where I am almost like cheat day proof, so to speak.
Yeah. In summary, what gets measured gets moved. And if we're trying to move our vehicle, which is, the needle forward, whether it's back, forward, losing weight, gaining weight, getting stronger, increasing fitness, whatever it might be, bringing more contentment to our life, we've got to be measuring things. And before we have actually measure things, we have to have concrete data and information to know where we want to go. We got to know where we're currently at. We got to know where we need to go. And a lot of this revolves around bringing more awareness around, what are the values of the things that we're putting into our bodies. And I think we shared some really good links here. Arian, the calculator, the calorie calculator that we like to use, the Omni calculator, it usually gives people probably more of an accurate gauge of where their calorie count should be based on where they're at, where their goal is. And then chronometer, like Arian mentioned, is a little bit better than MyFitnessPal in the sense of getting some accurate numbers on values of foods that we're putting in our body. But if you're not familiar with where your resting metabolic rate, where your calorie count is for your individual body and your goals, and you're not super familiar with things like how many calories are in this portion of food, what's the macronutrient breakdown, or you're maybe not even mindful of like eating packaged foods or whatnot, like looking at the nutritional label, looking at the ingredient list, we've got to bring more awareness to those things so that we can empower ourselves with information so that we know how to move this vehicle forward. And then we always have to be measuring something, and the scale isn't and shouldn't be the only metrics that we're using. Body composition, how clothes are fitting, how are we looking, how are we feeling, where's our mental clarity at, where's our energy levels, how's our training going. I mean, there's so many additional correlates out there that we could be measuring. We just have to make sure that we're doing it on a consistent basis. So we've got to know where we're at, we've got to know where we're going, we've got to measure something on a consistent basis, and then we have to be mindful of the things that we're taking in and empower yourself with information on the foods that you're putting into your body. Because if you're just doing it intuitively, but you have no intuition, or your intuition is leading you down the wrong road, we've got to change something on up. So that'll wrap it up for week 6 of our monthly support call. Aaron, we've got our recalibrate challenge coming on up. We're actually pushing it back. So was supposed to start on July 4th. We know that a lot of people may be out of town for the holiday weekend, so we're actually going to push it back a week. It's planning to begin on July 11th with a retest on July 16th. We got a lot of cool things in the mix for this summer recalibrate challenge. As always, we are going to split up teams into breakfast crew and cocktail crew. This year, we're actually going to do something different. We're definitely going to continue to make this challenge free for anybody that wants to sign up. But we're also going to incentivize folks with a little bit of a pot this year around. And so we're going to charge for a leveled up version of the recalibrate challenge, but in it, that pot is going to go to some pretty massive prize packs, and we're going to add some additional services behind those as well. So those of you guys that are interested in signing up, sign up is going to be at the gym, and it's going to be coming live in your face, email, text, all across, starting probably at the end of this week, moving through next week. Those of you guys that already are signed up, get excited because this is the summer check that you guys need. Anything else from you, Aaron?
No, excited about it. Definitely one of those things that can be overwhelming and like frustrating at times. So having support, direction, having incentives, I would say, is the biggest difference between people kind of getting back into the groove and then letting it go until, it's too late to handle or then into the new year.
Right. And remember, this summer recalibrate challenge, it's not it's based off of our win the year challenge at the start of the year. Hopefully things have been more consistent than not from the beginning of the year to now. This is just kind of a recalibration, a resetting of the sights to keep us moving into the end of the year and beyond. So there'll be a lot of cool things behind it and more details to come. So other than that, appreciate you guys that made it to the call. Next monthly support call will be July 28th, Thursday, July 28th. And we're looking forward to our next one. We'll see you guys later.